All right, so welcome everyone to Women in DevOps. We are live now. We'll give everyone a minute to get signed in and situated here and let everyone make their way to the webinar. As always, we will have a fantastic giveaway from JFrog, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But in the meantime, as you're coming in, maybe everyone can put where they are logging in from in the chat box around the world. We always have a global audience, so it's always really exciting to see where everyone's coming from. I am in Los Angeles. It's 9:30 in the morning. I've had one cup of coffee, so we're doing okay so far. But Jessica, where are you joining us from?
I'm logging in from Durham, North Carolina. It's a beautiful 40 degrees and rainy outside. Looking forward to some snow, and I'm on my fourth cup of coffee and I'm ready for my first nap.
There you go. I know I had heard y'all were having some winter weather out there, so hopefully it doesn't keep y'all down too long. Perfect. And Michelle, where are you?
Hard commute in the office chair.
Yes. You won't have to shovel any snow though. And Ishel, where are you joining us from?
Hi, Sabrina. I'm joining from Switzerland, so it's 6 p.m., 6:30 actually, but I'm from Mexico, so a little bit far away from home.
Perfect. Is it 6:30 at night, correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Just making sure we didn't do something very cruel to you.
No, but don't worry, I'm used to.
Perfect. And Danielle, where are you joining us from?
I'm joining from just outside of Portland, Oregon. So same time zone. And it is the lovely, rainy, overcast time of year here.
So very surprising. Wonderful. And Ari, last time you were joining us from Tennessee. Where are you now?
Wow. Actually, I didn't realize I joined you from Tennessee last time. I'm actually in Tennessee today, and you think I'd spend a lot of time here, maybe moonlighting as a country music star as I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. That's not the truth, and I won't sing for you. But I am in Tennessee with my family, and they're having some fun for birthdays and stuff. And I am working from the Hilton, so it's a great day here with a little snow and quite cold actually.
Perfect. That sounds great. Well, we've got some folks from Indiana. I used to live in Indiana, actually. So hello, everyone from there. I know we've got folks coming in from LA, New York, and England as well. So we've got like a really great global audience here, which is really exciting. So we're already 5 minutes in, so let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Women in DevOps. We're so excited to have you here. I'm going to introduce our panel in a bit more detail in a few minutes and also let Ari present the JFrog giveaway. But if you haven't been with us before, at Women in DevOps, we are an online community dedicated to serving and celebrating marginalized genders in the tech space. As always, our webinars are open to the entire community and free. And today's webinar, I'm really excited about our topic because we collaborated with our community to kind of come up with what we were going to do this month and listening to what folks wanted to hear about. And so I'm really excited about our panelists as well. They've got incredible insights to share. They've spent so much time in the space researching and working with serverless. So there's really not a better group of people to be discussing this with and answering our questions. But yeah, so the only thing different about today is that usually we have a networking session afterwards, and you're probably wondering where the networking link is. Because we're having more of a technical discussion and we're going to have an architecture walkthrough from one of our panelists, and we want to have plenty of time for Q&A. We're not going to be doing the networking today, but we will have that back next time, so don't worry about that. And the other thing I wanted to point out was we have Otter AI for subtitles, and Lucy has put in the chat box to the right how you can access that. So perfect. we'll be able to get through all the panel questions, have a great architecture walkthrough with Jessica, and be sure that we still have time for Q&A. But as always, Ari has a fantastic giveaway for us. I'm really excited to see what he's brought today. So Ari, I'll let you take over and talk a little bit about that.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. I really appreciate that. Hi, everybody. I'm Ari Waller, and I'm the Meetup Event Manager for JFrog. And again, for 2022, we are so excited to be a platinum sponsor for Women in DevOps. I'll just share a little bit about who we are. JFrog is the DevOps software company known best for Artifactory, which is considered by many to be the gold standard for managing your artifacts and dependencies. Now, tonight, I'm actually going to share a slide, if I can do that successfully here. Please work. Here we go. About a really exciting event that we have coming to Europe next week. We have our 2022 DevOps Cloud Days, and JFrog wants women and DevOps members to get in for free. DevOps Cloud Days is a 3-day virtual event showcasing content from JFrog, Microsoft Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud. One cloud provider is going to be showcasing each day, so you can kind of pick and choose throughout your workday which ones you want to listen to. It's going to be January 25th through the 27th, and we'll be demonstrating how developers can simplify and accelerate the deployment of their applications. So hopefully that's something that everyone can take advantage of. As you hopefully can see on the slide, you can see the slide, right? Yes, good. We have some great speakers, Bridget Kramhout, Steve Lasker, and Brian Benz, just to name a couple, from the Azure team, as well as our CTO, Yoav Landman, who will be speaking also. So again, we have a lot of great material. Check out, I'm going to drop a link so you can register for free. And also you can use the QR code that you see there. But as another quick bonus for tonight, we have a chance, since we're talking about a technical topic, for somebody to win a Raspberry Pi 400 complete PC kit. Now, I'm not sure if you've looked for one of these before. You can get them, but they only limit you to one. So I have to constantly get them from different providers to get some out to the meetup community, because the Raspberry Pi 4s and all of their accessories are a little bit difficult to get. So I would love to give this away to somebody in our audience today. You can enter with the QR code or the bit.ly link that you see, and I'll also drop that in the chat. And a winner will be selected within 2 business days. And then once the winner formally accepts the prize via email, I will go ahead and share the winner with the meetup community and on social media. So with that being said, so excited about the serverless discussion today. And Sabrina, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Ari. And what a great opportunity for our community with DevOps Cloud Days. And of course, with our giveaway that everyone's always so excited about every week. So thank you. And of course, thank you to JFrog, always being so supportive of our community and making sure that we have access to lots of opportunities.
Well, you're all awesome. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you. Okay, perfect. So I'll go around and start introducing everyone on our panel. I'll go ahead and start. My name is Sabrina. Again, I'm joining from Los Angeles. I co-founded Women in DevOps here on the West Coast, and I'm really passionate about building out our community and connecting folks with each other in the DevOps space, and furthering awareness about our movement. So Jessica, maybe I can have you introduce yourself next.
Sure. I'm Jessica. I use she, her pronouns. I am a senior DevOps engineer at Epistemics. We do agent-based modeling for epidemiological purposes. I've been in DevOps for 4 years, and before that, I was managing a food truck with my spouse. It was a lot of fun, but DevOps is just one giant puzzle to problem solve, and I just can't step away from it now. So it's a lot of fun.
Perfect. Thanks, Jessica. And we'll go in the circle here. Ishelle, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi again. Well, I am a software developer, but now I started very recently as a developer advocate. And that the reason why is because I even in the past, I have been developing software since 2000. So I'm kind of a veteran here. But I was very passionate about sharing knowledge and helping fellow developers into understanding and yes, in developing. And because of my heavy Linux background, I was always gravitating towards DevOps, like automatization. So again, a little bit of experience there.
Perfect. Thanks so much. And Danielle.
Hey y'all, I'm Danielle. I use she, her pronouns, and I currently work for a company called Tango. There's a few companies named Tango, so it's actually tango.us. Currently, we are a Chrome extension where you can record workflows with screenshots and directions in seconds. Ideal use case is for documentation to teach people new things and really easy to keep up to date. So really excited about that. It's a fully serverless shop, and I've been working in serverless full-time professionally for about 5 years. So probably in like serverless dog years, that might be more like 30. Just considering that AWS Lambda started in 2014, if you use that as your baseline, but not everyone does. And before I worked in serverless, I actually started out as a front-end software engineer, and then I migrated to containers, and now I'm in serverless.
Perfect. Thanks, Danielle. I do feel like the beginning of Lambda is probably a good benchmark for the serverless timeline. Perfect. So we are really excited today because Jessica is going to take over now and give us an architectural walkthrough of what serverless looks like and give us kind of some practical case scenarios for our community. So Jessica, I'll let you take over the screen now.
Sure. All right. Everyone see the screen? Darn. Okay. All right. So today, what I have put together for you is just a sort of simple walkthrough of a cloud architecture that would route to serverless functions with like a backend. We have an API with all the backend functions as serverless. Basically, you'd have a it's like a public network load balancer where you would have your ingress to your API, which would, I'm running this as, in this example, this is running on Kubernetes, and we have Kong as our ingress gateway for our services running on Kubernetes, or not running because it's serverless, but our gateway is running on Kubernetes, the entrance to our API. And from there, Istio is a service mesh, and that part I would say is optional for implementing your serverless functions, but it's very much a nice to have, as you can connect all of your services across multiple clouds in essentially one large private subnet with mutual TLS in between services. But if you wanted to skip that, you could route directly from your API gateway. If you were in AWS, if you wanted to use AWS API gateway, that's fine too. And from there, we come into the cloud. We have a route for our API. We'll just call it /v1, and then that routes to the Knative serving API. Knative is serverless functions compatible with any cloud provider. They have runtimes that you can build base container images off of. And from there, you can, once you get to the Knative, you'll route to, based on the event that you define to trigger the function, it will spin up a container. Probably the first one takes probably 2 to 3 seconds to spin up, but from there it is much faster, probably 200 to 300 millisecond latencies for response times from serverless functions. You could also use AWS Lambda. I feel like AWS Lambda is a great use case, honestly. I like Knative because it just allows me to stay a little bit cloud agnostic, and I enjoy managing infrastructure. So that's my own downfall here. But from once basically this just executes, the Knative functions will just execute on your already running infrastructure, and would just auto scale out as you needed and tear back down as the API traffic wound down. And then this is all kept internally and private from the cloud, and you just access it through your network load balancer and your NAT gateway. But yeah, that's a quick walkthrough.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Jessica. And of course, if anyone has any questions at any point, feel free to drop them in the chat box there as well. But Jessica, really appreciate that walkthrough. I think, before we jump into kind of the high level discussions here, it's just nice to have a visual and understand kind of what we're looking at. So that being said, let's just go ahead and jump into our panel discussion. And I think our first question here is probably the broadest question, but it's a good place to start because it also helps us kind of define what serverless is. So I'll pose this question to the panel just generally, feel free to jump in, but what to you are the greatest benefits of adopting serverless or serverless model?
Well, if I may start, one of the promises that has been made in our industry is to do not repeat yourself, keep it dry, focus on the functionality, try to leave boilerplate or repetitive tasks outside of your mind as a developer. And because we really, really don't like to reinvent the wheel. And there's a lot of things in software development or in applications that can be done in a better way, not by the developer itself, but by a single time and then reuse it. So keep it dry, reused, focus on the functionality. There are applications that are so well, or it can behave so well in a serverless environment. For example, if your application has a lot of reading, then probably you want to scale the reading functionality more than your writing or things like that. So yes, I think those are the main benefits that we can hear, and they are true for most part.
Perfect. I don't think anyone's going to argue that automating and not reinventing the wheel is an incredible benefit here, and definitely worth the implementation. Danielle or Jessica, did y'all want to add anything to that or elaborate?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Go ahead, Danielle.
You want to go, Jessica?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, I will. Yeah, I feel like I can't speak for you all, but for me, sometimes my code can be a really big liability. So if I can take, code that I would write and say like a function and offload it on some sort of cloud service instead, I feel like I much trust, Amazon, Google, Microsoft to get it right than myself. So I feel like that's a really big benefit of serverless is using those managed services.
I'd agree with that. I think I'll just reiterate, it makes development much easier because you're not worrying, all you are worrying about is taking the event that comes in and responding to it, and handling the event. You're not worried about any ports, not worried about any infrastructure at all. You package up the function code and you zip or container and it just runs wherever you want it to.
Perfect. So it sounds like
Beautiful
there
thing.
are, yes, it sounds like there are plenty of reasons that you would want to implement serverless. Danielle, I'd love you to go into a bit more detail about what serverless adoption looks like at an organization. I know you've got some experience with startups, so maybe you can go into a bit more detail and give our community some insight into what that change looks like.
Yeah, I can speak to personal experience from working at multiple startups. Another benefit of serverless, if you're using, true serverless services, is that they tend to auto scale. So like, for example, at my current company, Tango, we were featured on a website called Product Hunt and got pretty big, and we had a really huge traffic spike. And as an engineer there, it just auto scaled and handled everything fine. So I felt like for such a small team, not having to rush around and provision extra servers, that has been a very big benefit. And also too, just from a startup standpoint, a lot of times we have to get MVPs out for the venture capitalists in order to get funding. Otherwise, our company is dead. So like being able to hand that off to, we use Amazon Web Services. So like being able to hand off a lot of that stuff to AWS has given us time to build out our actual product and focus more on the customer value and just like the flow of how everything works. And yeah, particular for smaller teams, it has been really great. I do know there are larger enterprises that use serverless as well. One that comes to mind is Liberty Mutual. I know a few people there. So not suggesting that it's only for startups, but just speaking to personal experience in regards to startups.
I mean, it sounds like a no-brainer at this point. So my next question is, are y'all aware of any frequent, or maybe not frequent roadblocks, but are there any roadblocks to adoption that you could identify or maybe have heard about in the past, or objections to adopting this model?
Well, as a consultant, we always have to say it depends on the application that you're actually trying to develop. So that's your first concern. In terms of enterprises and companies, I always say that if you're not following the agile process, then it's going to be very tough because serverless, its whole concept is very, very into agile DevOps, like you having a CI/CD culture already there. If you don't have these two that are huge, then serverless, it's going to be very, very difficult. So these two you have to address first and decide if it actually matches your problem or your application or your solution, and if you're capable of implementing this working culture.
That's great. And I think kind of approaching the considerations from two ways, right? There's the technical feasibility, and then there's the organizational, like, are our processes in the right place for this? So any other considerations from Jessica or Danielle?
I know I worked at a company that built serverless tools, and one of the biggest concerns from people thinking about adopting serverless was the concern of vendor lock-in, having to, what if, GCP goes down, for example, and all my stuff is up there. That has been a main concern. I I'm a little biased, but personally, I think, there's lock-in everywhere beyond the cloud provider. Like if you pick a programming language, like you're locked in. So I think a lot of it's really just, weighing the pros and cons and what works best for your organization and your team. So
I agree with
That's
that.
true.
I mean, it also a roadblock to serverless it's really difficult to gain observation into your application. That is probably really depends on the application, but if you need those metrics, I mean, it's hard to get them out. At least it used to be extremely difficult. It is beginning to get easier now. There's becoming a lot of built-in libraries where you can ship logs and metrics directly from your functions to external services. But yeah, Danielle's right. There is lock-in everywhere. No matter what you're doing, you're locked into some specific technology.
That's true. We all know the texts and tweets that everyone gets when AWS goes down. All right, perfect. Well, after that, I mean, okay, so we've got a good idea of the benefits, some of the costs, some of the roadblocks implementations. Of course, from the DevOps world, we're all going to be interested, like what does infrastructure as code look like with serverless? So I was hoping, Ashali, you could go into a bit more detail kind of about that side.
Okay, well, now we're talking about that we can focus on functions, we can and have a dynamic way or an agile way of development. Now we're also in the world that we can try things like A/B testing. So we have to roll out our new functionalities. We have to react very fast to what our clients or prospective clients want or users. So now, because we have this culture, we have these tools and this way of working, it's really easy to start having different environments for testing, for quality, for performance, etc., etc. So now that we can have all these moving parts, and it is important that we also are able to orchestrate this in a sensible, useful, and fast way. So, and again, and what Jessica and Danielle were saying, one of the worries is that we get vendor locking. So there has been a lot of effort. There's outside a lot of tools to define, abstract in a more or less interesting way how we can create our different environments, keep them in a very simple way. Sometimes they are agnostic to different technologies, sometimes they are not because they are provided by the cloud providers. So infrastructure as code is how do we, in a simple way, extract the configuration of the different environments so all our infrastructure, it's easy to deploy, we have traceability, we have visibility, and if we're lucky, we can migrate between different cloud providers in a simple way. So that is infrastructure as code. And if you're thinking about the tools, I forgot about that. There is several ones. Probably you have heard about Terraform, Ansible, Puppet, Chef. So yes.
Anything else we can add to that point before we move on? Sounds like we're all good. And I just remembered that when we were talking about the roadblocks to adoption, I also wanted to ask about the cost. We've been talking so much about the cloud providers. Does anyone have any insights into kind of the cost models or, what the trade-offs are with, having a team doing this management by themselves, or having the cloud provider managing the servers. So, as I'm sure a lot of us are aware, the tops of our companies are always interested in how can we be cutting costs. So maybe someone can go into a bit more detail, because that's not something I've really looked into myself.
I think in terms of cost, a really big pro is pure serverless is pay as you go. So if you're running, functions, for example, like you're not going to provision them and just have them run and be paying for them. You're just going to be paying per invocation and as they're running. So a lot of the serverless services are that way. So depending on your workload, it could potentially save you a fair amount of money. From some folks, I have heard the opposite. It really depends on your workload and your use case. But my little tiny startup experience, serverless has been really great in terms of cost. If anything, the thing that has cost us the most has been the non-serverless services. So things like RDS, relational database services, it's always up and running. Elasticsearch, always up and running. But yeah, all the serverless stuff has been super cheap. And even considering that each dev has their own cloud environment, like it's from personal experience, it has been cheaper. But my experience might not be yours. So.
From what I've seen, I agree with that. The servers are the most expensive part. But because in my experience, being able to come out with somewhat of a hybrid model where I able to run a Kubernetes cluster on, say, spot instances. I can run a control plane on something that costs me less than a penny an hour and have high availability for a control plane and come out actually cheaper than I would doing EKS or something like that. And then have anything like metrics or logging servers, say I have a Grafana or Influx, and I'm already exporting logs to there. I can have serverless functions run as containers across that infrastructure. And if I have to scale out, it's going to be a larger uptime than if I was just submitting to AWS Lambda, like a cold start time, if I had to boot up a new instance. But once that scales out, it's the same startup time essentially. But a lot of the costs I've run into in cloud providers like AWS is honestly, it's not necessarily the compute costs, but it's the bandwidth and data that is the most expensive part, is moving that data around in the cloud for us anyway.
Perfect. That's really insightful. Thanks so much, Jessica.
Sure.
And then while we're here, another big consideration for serverless that we've run into quite a bit is, what does security look like? How do we keep a security mindset while working within the serverless model? Jessica, do you have any insight into that specifically?
Sure. What we have done, we're still building things from the ground up, but the first thing we did was create an OIDC workflow with Keycloak and Kong to lock down our APIs and implement authorization and resource management of the API through Keycloak or something like that. And it's honestly, the effort to start something like that is so low that it's not doing it is silly. It is very, I don't want to say, it's very straightforward. And I mean, past locking that down, with past locking your API down or your application down with OAuth, another benefit is you're really only having an ingress to your cloud on one port with TLS, which I think is really beneficial. I mean, in my use case, that's what I'm doing. There are obviously there's depends on your use case, but for something like an API, it's nice having everything. I mean, the great part about security and serverless is you don't worry about it when you're developing. You offload all of that onto the front end. And that's the beautiful part. Really speeds up the development process and frees up the developer from worrying about application security other than their own code.
Perfect. Any other considerations from Michelle or Danielle?
Well, security is from the design point of view and from running. Even though a lot of the running security is taken care of by the infrastructure, we still have to keep in mind that we need to define the policies at the end of the day. So pay attention to that, follow the best practices, read the different recommendation from the cloud providers. So, but that happens in any system. And it has had sad news if you are not worried about that. So it's inherent to what you're exposing. It's inherent how your services communicate between them. It's inherent to how you configure your infrastructure. But do we face something new? No, I don't think so. There is no new monsters under the bed.
That sounds great. I know that security was something that our community wanted to know a bit more about. So really appreciate us all going into more detail. And another kind of part of our community, we have so many people or folks in Women in Devops who are very interested in testing. And we have a really large QA community. So one of the challenges that we've identified with serverless is running serverless or testing serverless applications. So Danielle, I know you've come across a few kind of anecdotes within your space of what this looks like, but maybe you can go into a bit more detail around what the challenges look like and any potential mitigation.
Yeah, I feel like probably the biggest challenge is, as someone who's come from more of a dev background, less ops, whenever I first started with serverless, I thought, this is cool. How can I run all this on my laptop locally? I always ask that. There are some answers out there now, but there's also some debate between, if you should try to emulate a cloud provider like AWS on your computer, if that is the best practice, or if the best practice is to, just have your own sandbox cloud account that you use. So I'm not going to say one is right and one is wrong, but there's definitely pros and cons to both. I know for local emulation, it seems like local stack is pretty big. I've kind of used that on and off, mostly for like DynamoDB locally, things like that. At a company that I used to work at, Stackery, we just made it up. It was like a marketing term, cloud local. So essentially the idea is if you have, this was all AWS, so I'll use AWS terms. If you had a Lambda function that was talking to other external services, there are tools that you can use where you can emulate the Lambda function locally on your computer. Under the hood, under the tools, it's actually run in a Docker container. And if it's talking to like a queue or something like that, it's talking to your deployed. So it's like a cloud, local, kind of hybrid way of testing for your inner dev loop. And personally, that has helped me out a lot. But as you move away from, using less functions and more into the managed services, that's where that can get kind of challenging. But yeah, I feel like in terms of automated testing, I know a lot of folks that tend to rely more on the unit testing. So just like mocking local services. And we do have a few end-to-end tests at my current company. And how we do that is it's a TypeScript, JavaScript shop. There's like an end-to-end test runner called Cypress that we used. You can use like headless things and you spin up an ephemeral environment, then you run your tests across it. So it's a different way of thinking, not fully exactly fleshed out yet, but it's always interesting to talk to different people because every time I talk to someone, everyone has a different view on it. And I personally learned something new, so.
Nice. Anything else to add on that topic before we move on? I think we're good then. That was a really great overview and practical case as well. So thank you, Danielle. So what we're going to do now, since we're coming towards the end of our questions, we are going to put a poll up for everyone to answer. Now that we've talked about the benefits of serverless, the costs, the considerations around implementation, feel free to fill out the poll and give your opinion on both of these questions here. We'll discuss that at the end. But our last question here, of course, and we've talked a lot about this already through the questions, but this is a good way to kind of wrap up and give our final thoughts here is, for each of the panelists, how has the serverless model impacted your day-to-day as a developer? Feel free to take that as broad or as narrow as possible. Maybe we can start with Jessica.
Sure, I've always been more on the ops side, but I've done some in the past. I've done some local development for just my own things to help me day to day in ops, and then I've started more recently developing TypeScript or developing TypeScript serverless API, and it's really just forced me to think more abstractly. It is more complex in the sense, not necessarily anything is more difficult per se. There's just more components, or there's the same number of components, they're just no longer monolithic, which is good and bad. But I would say it's kind of sped up my process a lot easier because I could just run. I guess I could do it before either, but there's a lot of, the landscape is getting much better for testing locally. I've used local stack before, that's nice. But yeah, I don't really have too much to say on that. I guess I'm kind of agnostic to it either way. It's helped me think more abstractly. I would say that's probably the most impactful thing.
Perfect. Thanks, Jessica. Maybe we can go to Danielle now.
I think for me, it is a very technical thing, but I feel like the biggest impact for me has been more like the human side of it. Because you have to completely change your process when you kind of have a more blurry you don't have a clean line between dev and ops with something like serverless in general. And I feel like it's helped me, coming from more the dev side, learn more about ops and how things work, and being able to kind of learn some of the lingo that the smart ops people use. And also serverless is such a new thing that we are all learning. And, you know, there's always a new service or something that's released. And I feel like the overall serverless community has been really great with learning. So like people are very accessible. Like I've DM'd, you know, some, you know, Twitter superhero people, and like they've always answered me and have had time for me. And the community has been really great.
Wonderful. Thanks, Danielle. And Michelle, I'll let you finish this one out.
Well, thank you, Sabrina. I have 2 points of view. One is as a developer, as I mentioned, I have been working in this for quite long. So I started with functional programming, then moved to object-oriented, and now serverless, it's very close to functional programming. So there has been a shift in how do we see our applications, or how do we think about our problem and how to model it. So in that regard, it has been interesting to see how we're moving into the architecture and designing. How do we see the problems? How do we actually break it down and create our functions, or when it actually is better or not? So that has been a journey in itself. As a DevOps person, well, as I said, for me, it came very, very natural because I was a Linux person since the early beginning. So for me, this kind of way of working, it was very, very natural. So I was involved since the early beginning, even if before it was called DevOps. But anyway, but again, here you have more challenges for the developers that didn't have my background. Some of them are like, what are you talking about, Excel? Like, why do I have to care about this? Are you crazy? Before, I only published my binary, or I gave it to another team and go deploy however you want. I mean, I don't even care. Now it's like, oh my goodness. So there has been a learning curve for developers, like only developers. But I think it's interesting because there is more ownership. So people can see the full cycle. So we react faster, we understand a little bit better. And when before was like, I don't care, if that's your problem, my problem is this one, it suddenly disappeared. And as Danielle says, there's a lot of challenges, because if you're working in a company that has two teams, the teams working in different functions, well, it's easy to decide the contracts. It's easy to test. But what happens if you're working in a large company that are thousands or hundreds, let's put it in hundreds of services, then the interaction between teams, it starts to be more interesting. So now design contracts we go into more different challenges, let's put it like that. Not only technical, socially, and as teams. How do we collaborate? How do we test? How do we develop? How do we verify that everything is working? So it's interesting. So serverless for me, it is a great advantage, a different mindset that brings a lot of interesting way of thinking, at least for me. And for developers, it's a way to see the entire circle or the entire cycle of software development. So I like it.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Michelle. Wonderful. Well, before we sign off, we did have a few folks put some questions in the Q&A from our live streams. However, a lot of the questions were, what are security implementations? What does infrastructure as code look like? So we did go into that in a bit of detail, and it was great that folks were kind of anticipating the topics that we needed really to touch on. So that's great. If anyone has very specific questions, maybe follow-ups, please feel free to still put that in the chat. But maybe for now we can go around and give any like closing thoughts. And also do a sign off, talk a bit more about where we can all connect with each other. And of course, Danielle, you also mentioned the serverless community, so how we can become part of that and start engaging with that. So, I'll start. Everyone can connect with me on LinkedIn, and then we've also got a Women in DevOps Slack group that I will put the link to join in the chat box very shortly. Any follow-up about the serverless conversation and any resources that we talk about here or we can provide afterwards, I'll put in that group. So everyone's welcome to join, obviously. And then also please feel free to find me on LinkedIn. And add me. I'm always open to talking about women in DevOps and also hearing about what topics folks want to hear about in the future. Ishel was mentioning that we could do an entire series on serverless, and we've really just done kind of a big overview, and I'm sure there's so much we could just dive into, but in the future, any other specific topics, whether that's around diversity in the tech space, career development, or technical trends, I want to hear about them and we want to bring them to you. That's what we did this month. And it's had some really great traction. So thanks again, everyone. Danielle, I'll let you do a sign off as well.
Cool. Yeah, I feel like I got pretty involved in the serverless community just from attending various serverless themed conferences. A lot of times, which can be a pro or con, you see a lot of repeat speakers. So those are my general pattern, was to kind of take note and be like, this person seems smart and nice. And I stalked them on Twitter and sent them a DM, if I had a very specific, like implementation question with like DynamoDB or something like that. I know in AWS world, all of the serverless developer advocates are very, very open to people asking them questions. They do, I think, like a weekly Twitch stream. I think it's like serverless office hours. That's a really great place to go, ask questions live. They're also recorded. So if you have to work or something, you don't have to worry about that. As for me, personally, I just joined the Women in DevOps Slack channel. So if you have any questions, feel free to DM me. You can find me on Twitter at DeeHeber, Dheber. You can find me on LinkedIn. I always like to meet new people and hear what other people are working on.
Thanks so much, Danielle. And I just put the link to join our Slack group there. And I know with our community, a lot of folks are posting technical questions, and it's always so great to see everyone reach out in the comments and help them work through that. So that's definitely a really great community engagement that we do as well. And Danielle, if you want to put any helpful links to that Twitch or your Twitter in the Slack group as well, that would be awesome. So folks can access that later. And Ishel, I'll let you go next.
Well, I want to say almost the same as Danielle. So please ask questions. Like people in the conferences, the speakers are always open to hear you, and the communities that I move around, like mine, because of my background, is basically Java, but that community is amazing. Ruby community is also very, very nice. So interact with the community. I particularly support a lot open source. So that's also a great way to integrate with a larger community and give back in the meanwhile. This is a personal request. I'm also part of a lot of content committee programs in different conferences. And I always want to help new speakers to come. And so if you want to start speaking at conferences, for example, I participate in Javaland, which is one of the largest in Germany. We have a track for newcomers. And there's a lot of these kinds of initiatives around the world, either in user groups or conferences. So if you want more or little tips or connect, let me know. I'm in the Slack channel, and my Twitter, LinkedIn is like my name and my last name. Thankfully, it's quite unique, so you can find me. And that's it. Thank you very much, Sabrina.
Perfect. No, thank you. And I'm talking with folks in our community every day, essentially, and a lot of what they bring up for career development is that they want to get into speaking. It's a great resume builder. It's a great way to just get involved with the community and network. So that's perfect. And thank you so much for opening that opportunity to everyone. And we actually have a really large following in Germany as well. So that's perfect. Led by our colleague, Antonia. She was at Devops Days there just a few weeks ago, I think, in Berlin. So Jessica, I will let you do your sign off as well.
Sure, I'm nowhere near as engaged as Ishel and Danielle, but I am on LinkedIn and I at aggressively Jessica. And I really just love connecting and discussing technical topics and really working through and discussing any problem that's not my own, because I've got way too many of those. So I need some distraction. But yeah, this is wonderful. I don't really have a whole lot to add.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Jessica. And thank you, all three of y'all, for joining and giving your time this morning or evening or afternoon, depending on where you are. I know our community really appreciates it and really wanted to talk about this topic and get connected. So hopefully we can all keep in touch via the Slack group, via LinkedIn, and we will continue to put more resources in there to follow up. And thank you everyone again for joining, whether you're joining on Zoom, on our live stream on Twitter or on LinkedIn. Again, my name's Sabrina, and looking forward to seeing everyone at next month's Women in DevOps, which we will be announcing very soon. And then Ari or Lucy, did we want to follow up on the giveaway? Do we have a winner? Oh, I don't think Ari's here. That's okay. That's all good. We will have Ari announce at a later time who the winner. Yes, perfect. Who the winner is, which is great because that gives everyone a chance if they didn't get to sign up for that yet. So thanks again, everyone. This is perfect. Yes, Ari will send an email about that, and we will see you next time.